Yes. Hello and welcome to Narayana IAS live session. Students, in today's live session, we shall be focusing on a very interesting topic. And the name of the topic is Dubey Doctrine. Now, for someone who is interested in the international politics, Indian foreign policy, the evolution of Indian foreign policy, I'm pretty sure this article is going to attract a lot of your attraction and interest. So let us try to understand this topic holistically. Again, this topic is authored by a very famous columnist, C. Raja Mohan. So students, in this article, we are going to understand the Dubey Doctrine. Now, in this article, we are going to focus on the evolution of the Indian foreign policy. Why? Because the question can be asked in the UPSC examination over how the Indian foreign policy has evolved or changed since the time India got independence. Right? And that's the reason, let's try to understand the evolution of Indian foreign policy. And most importantly, students, in this article, we are going to understand the influence of one of the finest diplomat India has ever seen. Right? So again, you can map this particular topic under GS paper 2. So now, why do we understand or study or discuss this topic? Because a question, as I told you, can be expected in the UPSC examination. And what is the question? The question was asked in the year 2019. The question was the long sustained image of India as a leader of oppressed and the marginalized section or nations has disappeared on account of its newfound role in the emerging global order. Right? So in this, we need to understand how India was a leader of the oppressed nations and now how that role has significantly or drastically changed. The context being that Ambassador Muchkund Dubey, right, considered to be one of the finest diplomat, right? He was part of the Indian Foreign Service. He retired as a foreign secretary. So we'll understand his role as a bureaucrat, as a diplomat, and his influence on India's foreign policy. We'll understand his valuable insights into the evolution of India's foreign policy, especially when India was transitioning from a decolonized or decolonization agenda to addressing new global challenges. So this transition is something we are going to understand. So the decolonization agenda to new global challenges. Now, what is this deglobalization agenda? Students, in the 1950s and 1960s, right, India was a nascent, newly born country. Now, in the 50s and 60s, India was actually advocating or supporting the global decolonization efforts. Because in the 60s and 70s, there were a few countries like South Africa who were a colony to the Western powers, right? And as a reason, India supported this call for the deglobalization, right? And in the international platforms or in various platforms, India advocated this cause, like non-alignment movement is one such platform where India actually advocated for a deglobalized world. So this was the decolonization agenda. This was in the 50s and the 60s. Now the 60s and the 70s onwards, the Indian foreign policy now started to address the bigger challenges. The bigger challenges being promoting development, disarmament of the mutually destructive weapons or mutually assured destruction like the nuclear weapons, and then the democratization of the international order like the United Nations. So such were the challenges the Indian foreign policy started to face in the 60s and the 70s. Now this is how the foreign policy or the objective of foreign policy is transitioning. Now in the 60s and 70s, when the Indian foreign policy was transitioning, India advocated the cause of developing countries and India pushed for a new international economic order, NIEO. What is new international economic order? NIEO is an order, or is an can say that it is one of the objectives or the new international economic order sought to redistribute the global wealth and making sure that the wealth is distributed to the developing countries as well. So here the redistribution of wealth is taking place and India was actually seeking to make the world an equitable one. Right, so this new international economic order sought to redistribute the global wealth. Now came the decade of 1990s, that is pre-reform era, that is before the 1990s, India's economic policies were characterized by one, protectionism, right? The second is state-led industrialization, that is the state used to lead or control the industries, and India was engaging very limitedly with the outside power. So the outside engagement was to a bare minimum. So India was focused more inwards than focusing or integrating with the outside world. So India was focusing on self-reliance and reducing dependency on foreign capital and technology. But then this had to change. Why? Because India was facing a balance of payment crisis, which means India did not have money to pay for the imports, and that's the reason that pushed India to undertake significant economic reforms in the form of LPG, that is liberalization, privatization and globalization. Now we started integrating or interacting with the outside world more frequently, and this was further pushed by the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which was an outcome of the Uruguay round of talks. Now, students, this General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade actually pushed for reducing tariffs. Now, by reducing the tariffs, the outcome or the result being the trade gets pushed, or the trade gets promoted. More and more trade happens or takes place between countries, which is good for the overall global economic order, right? So here in the 50s, 60s, India was advocating for a decolonized world. Then 60s and 70s, now Indian foreign policy started to face different challenges. Now came the 1990s phase where India had to undertake the LPG reforms. Now talking about the nuclear diplomacy. Now when it comes to nuclear diplomacy, how our foreign policy altered or changed? Let's try to understand this. Until the end of Cold War, that is until the 1990s, India advocated for global nuclear disarmament, which means India was advocating, or India was India was aiming to make the world a nuclear free world, which means India wanted to eliminate all the nuclear weapons in the world. So this was India's position with respect to nuclear weapons. Again, that changed after the end of Cold War, that is in the year 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, disintegrated. Now, because of the security issues, because of the national security issues, India was pushed to make nuclear weapons. So India began making nuclear weapons, and in the year 1998, India for the very first time tested and detonated nuclear weapons. By detonating nuclear weapons, India ensured her national security. At the same time, India advocated for strategic autonomy. Why? We are forced to make nuclear weapons. It was not India's choice, but the way international order was behaving or changing that actually pushed India to secure our own national security, and we simply cannot rely on any foreign power to secure our border. Simple. This is how our nuclear diplomacy saw a transition. Then economic diplomacy, we discussed this in the 1960s or in the 1970s and 80s. India advocated for a new international economic order, that is, India tried to address the economic inequalities between the developed countries and developing countries. How? By promoting fairer trade practices which could benefit the developing countries, technology transfer from the developed countries to developing countries, and financial assistance from the developed countries or the world institutions like the World Bank, International Monetary Fund to the developing countries. Adaptation to globalization. As I told you, the requirement, the balance of payment crisis forced India to adopt globalization. And this is how India integrated with the outside world. India attracted the foreign capital, technology, which was very, very crucial for India's growth and development. The position of India today, the economic heft that India holds in today's world, is because of the reforms that we had undertaken during the 1990s. Now talking about regionalism and the South Asian cooperation. Now students, in order to boost or in order to strengthen the regional cooperation, India was a founding member, or India had put its weight behind for the formation of SAARC. What is SAARC? South Asian Association Cooperation Development in the year 1985. The purpose was to promote regional integration and cooperation among all the South Asian countries like India, we have Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, etc. But then the regional cooperation faced challenges because of the Indian-Pakistan enmity. Because of the way Pakistan was supporting the terrorist forces in Kashmir, and the developments happening in Kashmir was a reason India and Pakistan, or for that matter SAARC as a regional organization, did not move ahead with pace. Now here we understand how India's foreign policy shifted to pragmatic multilateralism. What is multilateralism? Multilateralism is when multiple countries come together to deal with a specific issue. For example, India, Japan, Australia, US have come together to stop or prevent the growing Chinese hegemony. So here multiple countries engage and they engage in issue-based coalitions and align with the like-minded countries. Like just now I gave the example of India, US, Japan, Australia. All these countries have come together, like-minded nations have come together to face or to deal with the emerging issues. One, we have the growing Chinese hegemony. The other issues being disarmament, arms control, and non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. Now, as we saw the regional initiatives or the SAARC not progressing at pace, India had to focus or India was pushed to focus on other alternatives, like we have this BIMSTEC. Now, as the regional cooperation or regional integration was not taking place because of Indian-Pakistan enmity, India had to focus on other alternatives like BIMSTEC. Now, BIMSTEC stands for Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation. It encompasses countries like India, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, right? Indian Ocean Rim Association. All the countries adjoining the Indian Ocean, like we have India, Bangladesh, then we have Maldives, etc. And there are other countries as well, right? Then Mekong-Ganga cooperation. Now, Mekong-Ganga cooperation is a cooperation between India plus 5 ASEAN countries. ASEAN countries like we have Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Myanmar, right? And then South Asian Sub-Regional Economic Cooperation, all the countries in SAARC minus Pakistan. So India had to focus on these sub-regional alternatives. Why? So as to focus or strengthen the regional integration and ensure that the trade between all these regional players or regional stakeholders takes place. So the point is, this is how the Indian foreign policy changed. Back then in the 50s and 60s, we focused on the decolonized world. 60s, 70s, 80s, we started to focus or face the new emerging challenges. And then 80s and 90s, we started to integrate and interact with the outside power. And now here we see that in the multilateralism, multiple countries are coming together to deal with specific issues, right? So this is how our foreign policy transitioned, and in this transition, the ambassador Dubey played a pivotal role in India's transitioning in the foreign policy. So this is how the Indian foreign policy evolved. I hope since you have understood the evolution of India's foreign policy and the influence of Ambassador Dubey in the transition of India's foreign policy. And this is how we have covered all the dimensions in this particular article, students. I hope this article will be helpful whenever you get a question dealing with India's foreign policy. So that's it, students. That's it from our live session. I hope these topics that we are taking as part of Narayana IAS live session is helping you to connect with these topics and develop a holistic understanding, which I'm pretty sure will help you to deal with the examination and ace the examination. So that's it from our live session. Students, if you want us to continue with our live session, then please do like, share and subscribe to Narayana IAS. Thank you so much.